When my husband sat me down for a serious talk, he said, "I've already asked your sister to be my girlfriend, and she said yes." When my husband sat me down for a serious talk, he said, "I've already asked your sister to be my girlfriend, and she said yes." What do you mean she said yes? I stared at my husband Colin while he sat there calm like he'd just told me about changing our Netflix password. We'd been married for 7 years, and my younger sister Aubrey had been living with us for the past 3 months after her apartment flooded. She agreed that our arrangement makes sense for everyone involved. He pulled out his laptop and opened a PowerPoint presentation titled, "Our New Family Dynamic," with a photo of all 3 of us from last Christmas. I've thought this through rationally, and the benefits are clear. He clicked to the next slide, which had bullet points about household efficiency and shared expenses. My sister walked in from the kitchen carrying coffee for him, but not for me. "Hey sis, we need to talk about the new arrangement." She sat next to Colin on the couch, and they held hands right in front of me. Colin explained how this is actually better for you too. Better for me? My husband wanting to date my sister was better for me? "You've been stressed with work lately, and having me help with Colin's needs means less pressure on you." Aubrey said this like she was doing me a favor. Colin clicked to another slide showing a weekly schedule. "See, Monday, Wednesday, Friday you have me. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday Aubrey has me. Sundays we all spend together as a family." He'd color-coded it with my days in blue and Aubrey's in pink. This way everyone gets attention and no one feels neglected. I stood up, but my legs felt weak. "You made a schedule for dating my sister?" Colin nodded, proud of his organization. "I also made a chore chart and a budget breakdown. Aubrey will contribute 30% to household expenses now as an official partner." He showed another slide with financial projections. "We'll actually save money with 3 incomes." Aubrey sipped the coffee she'd made in my kitchen using my mug. "Plus, I already live here, so nothing really changes except we're being honest about feelings." She touched Colin's knee. "We've been feeling this connection for weeks." Weeks. They'd been planning this for weeks while I went to work every day thinking my marriage was normal. "When did this start?" Colin looked thoughtful. "Remember when you had that conference in Dallas? Aubrey and I really bonded that weekend. That was 6 weeks ago. I'd been gone 3 days for a work requirement. You slept with my sister while I was at a conference?" They both laughed like I'd said something ridiculous. "We didn't sleep together. We just talked about our feelings and realized we're compatible." Aubrey added quickly, "Colin would never cheat. That's why we're doing this ethically." Ethically. They kept using that word. Colin pulled out a printed document. "I found this polyamory agreement template online. We just need to sign it to make things official." The document was 20 pages long with sections about date nights and intimate boundaries. "You already filled in our names." I noticed the date was from 2 weeks ago. "We wanted to be prepared for this conversation," Aubrey said while scooting closer to Colin. "What about our marriage vows?" Colin flipped to another slide showing statistics. 20% of couples try ethical non-monogamy. "We're actually being progressive." Aubrey nodded. "In some cultures, sisters share husbands. It's totally natural." She pulled out her phone. "I already joined some online groups for sister wives." Colin showed another slide with a house floor plan. "I'm thinking we convert the garage into a second master suite. That way everyone has privacy." He'd already priced out contractors. $18,000, but worth it for our new lifestyle. Our savings had $18,000 exactly. "You want to spend our entire savings?" Colin corrected me. "A bedroom for my second partner. We need to stop thinking in terms of possession." Aubrey stood up. "I know this is a lot, but we're trying something new and beautiful." She put her hand on my shoulder. "We're in love whether you accept it or not." That's when I smiled for the first time. "You know what? You're absolutely right." They both looked shocked at my sudden agreement. "Really?" Colin asked, suspicious. "Really. In fact, why don't we call my dad right now and tell him the good news?" Aubrey went pale. "Why would we call Dad?" I pulled out my phone, already dialing. "To tell him about your new relationship. I'm sure he'll want to know." Colin looked confused, but Aubrey grabbed my phone. "We don't need to involve parents yet." But Dad already answered on speaker. "Hey sweetheart, how's everything?" So there I was with Dad on speaker, and Aubrey looking like she might throw up all over Colin's precious PowerPoint. Colin tried to grab my phone, but I stepped back and held it up where he couldn't reach. The thing about my dad is he raised us both, and he knows exactly who Aubrey really is. She was his favorite growing up, but that changed after she borrowed money from him and never paid it back. 3 separate times. Now she's standing in my living room holding hands with my husband and thinking, "I'm just going to let this slide?" Dad was still waiting for an answer, and I was going to give him one he'd never forget. "What's going on over there?" Dad asked through the speaker, his voice carrying that dad tone that meant he knew something was up. I looked right at Aubrey while I answered. "Dad, I have some really exciting news about Aubrey. She's got a new boyfriend, and you'll never guess who it is." Aubrey's eyes went wide, and she started waving her hands at me like she could somehow stop the words from reaching the phone. "Wait, Dad. It's not what it sounds like," Aubrey said loud enough for him to hear, her voice going high and shaky. "We were going to tell everyone in our own time, and this is really not fair." Colin stepped forward and put his hand on Aubrey's shoulder like he was about to give a work presentation to a difficult client. "Mr. Fritz, this is Colin. I think there's been a misunderstanding about how we're framing this situation. What we're doing is exploring modern relationship structures that many healthy couples are adopting these days. It's actually quite common, and there's a lot of research showing the benefits of expanded family units. He used that calm voice that used to make me feel safe, but now just made me want to throw something at his head. The phone went silent. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. 5 full seconds of nothing from my father, and I watched Colin's confident smile start to fade just a little at the edges. Aubrey was gripping Colin's arm so hard her knuckles were turning white. Then Dad spoke, and his voice was flat and cold in a way I'd only heard a few times in my whole life. "Colin, are you sleeping with my younger daughter while you're married to my older daughter?" Colin actually took a step back like the words had pushed him. "Sir, that's not exactly... we haven't technically... What I'm trying to say is that there's an emotional connection that developed naturally, and we have future plans that involve all three of us in a way that's fair and balanced, and I have a whole presentation that explains the structure if you'd like to see it sometime." He was stumbling over himself, and it was the first time I'd seen him lose that smug confidence since this whole nightmare started. "Future plans," Dad repeated slowly. "You have future plans to be with both of my daughters." Colin nodded, even though Dad couldn't see him. "Yes, sir, in an ethical framework that respects everyone's needs and boundaries." Modern psychology actually supports these kinds of arrangements when done correctly with open communication and clear expectations. That's when Aubrey started crying. Not quiet tears, but full-on sobbing with her shoulders shaking and mascara running down her cheeks. "I knew this would happen," she wailed. "I knew everyone would react this way. Nobody ever supports my choices. Nobody ever wants me to be happy. You all just want to control my life and tell me what I can and can't feel." She was doing that thing she'd done since we were kids, where she made herself the victim no matter what she'd actually done. When she broke Mom's favorite vase playing ball in the house, it was somehow my fault for not stopping her. When she got caught cheating on a test in high school, it was the teacher's fault for making the test too hard. And now here she was again, crying about how unfair everyone was being while she stood in my living room holding my husband's hand. "Aubrey," Dad said through the phone, his voice still that scary calm, "put your sister on the phone. Not on speaker. Just her." Aubrey looked at me with something close to panic in her eyes. "Dad, we should all talk about this together as a family. That's what Colin says is the healthy way to handle these conversations." But I was already walking toward the kitchen with my phone pressed to my ear. "I'm here, Dad," I said, as I took him off speaker and closed the door behind me. The kitchen was dark and quiet, and I could still hear Aubrey crying in the living room, but it felt far away now. "I need you to pack a bag," Dad said, and his voice was different now. Softer, but serious in a way that made my throat tight. "Pack enough for a few days and come stay with me tonight. Don't argue with them. Don't explain anything. Just get your things and leave." I leaned against the counter and felt my hands shaking. "Dad, I don't even know what to do." They had a whole PowerPoint. They had a schedule with color coding. They already filled out some kind of contract. Dad made a sound that might have been a laugh if it wasn't so angry. "Your sister has been pulling this kind of thing her whole life, but this is something else. You come here tonight and we figure out your next steps together. I know a divorce lawyer from my golf club. Good guy. Won the case for my friend when his wife tried to take everything. We're going to need someone like that. Divorce." The word hit me in the chest, but it also felt right. Like finally someone was saying out loud what I'd been too scared to think. "What about Aubrey?" I asked. "What about her?" Dad's voice was hard. "She made her choice. She chose your husband over her own sister. That's not something you come back from. Now pack your bag and get out of there before they try to talk you into staying." Colin's got that smooth way of talking, and I don't want you listening to another word he says tonight. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "Okay, Dad. I'll be there in an hour." I hung up and stood in my dark kitchen for a minute just breathing. Through the wall I could hear Colin's voice, low and soothing, probably telling Aubrey that everything would be fine and that I'd come around once I had time to process. That was his favorite word. Process. Like my whole life falling apart was just something I needed to think about a little longer before I agreed it was a good idea. But I wasn't going to process anything. I was going to pack a bag and go to my father's house and let someone who actually loved me help figure out how to fix this mess. I walked back through the living room without looking at either of them and went straight upstairs to our bedroom. My bedroom. The bedroom I'd shared with Colin for 7 years thinking we were building something real. I pulled out a suitcase and started throwing clothes into it. I could hear footsteps on the stairs, and then Colin appeared in the doorway looking worried for the first time since he'd started his stupid presentation. "What are you doing?" he asked. "What did your dad say?" I didn't answer. I just kept packing. Underwear, socks, the comfortable jeans I wore on weekends, my phone charger, the book I'd been trying to read for months but never had time for. "We should talk about this," Colin said, stepping into the room. "Running away to your father's house isn't going to solve anything. We need to have an adult conversation about our feelings and our future." I zipped the suitcase and finally looked at him. "My lawyer will be in touch," I said, and the shock on his face was worth every horrible minute of this night. I walked past him and down the stairs where Aubrey was still sitting on the couch with tissues all around her. She looked up at me with red eyes. Where are you going? We're not done talking. But I was done. I was so done. I walked out the front door and got in my car and drove to my father's house while my phone buzzed with texts from both of them that I didn't read. The whole drive I kept thinking about that schedule Colin had made. Blue for me, pink for Aubrey. Like we were appointments in his calendar instead of people. Like 7 years of marriage meant nothing more than a time slot he could rearrange whenever he wanted. But that was over now. When I pulled into Dad's driveway and saw the porch light on waiting for me, I felt something I hadn't felt in hours. Safe. I was going to be okay. It might take a while and it might hurt like hell, but I was going to be okay. Because I had family that actually acted like family. Unlike my sister, who apparently thought family meant something very different. I went upstairs to pack while Colin and Aubrey whispered urgently in the living room. Through the vent, I could hear Colin saying we needed to control the narrative before this got out of hand. Aubrey was crying about how I ruined everything by calling Dad. Good. Let them panic. Let them realize that their little schedule and color-coded calendar meant nothing when real family got involved. Dad had already texted me the name of a divorce lawyer he knew from his golf club. 20 minutes ago, I was the confused wife. Now I was the one with a plan. And trust me when I say what happened at Dad's house the next morning made their PowerPoint look like a kindergarten project. Dad was waiting for me in the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee on the table, and that look on his face that meant he'd been thinking hard about something. I sat down across from him and wrapped my hands around the warm mug, while he just looked at me for a minute like he was trying to figure out where to start. There's something I need to tell you, he said finally, and the way he said it made my stomach feel cold. About a month ago, Aubrey called me asking for money. $5,000. She said it was for repairs at her apartment from a flood damage. He rubbed his face with his hand like he was tired. She said the insurance wasn't covering everything, and she needed help getting back on her feet. I thought about Aubrey living in my guest room for 3 months, eating my food, using my things, and apparently planning to take my husband the whole time. Did you give it to her? Dad shook his head. I told her I'd think about it. Something felt off about the whole thing. The way she was talking about how stressed she was at your place, how she might need to stay there longer than planned. He reached for his phone on the table. Now I know why she really wanted that money. She wasn't planning to fix her apartment. She was planning to stay with you forever. He unlocked his phone and started scrolling through messages. I need to show you something, and I'm sorry because it's going to hurt, but you need to see who your sister really is. He turned the phone toward me, and I saw a long chain of text messages between him and Aubrey going back months. Months of my sister complaining about me to our own father. Read them, Dad said quietly. So I did. The first one was from 4 months ago, before the flood even happened. Aubrey had written that I was being controlling about the guest bathroom and wouldn't let her keep her stuff in there. That wasn't true. I just asked her to keep her makeup off the counter because Colin used that bathroom too. The next message was worse. She'd told Dad that I was cold and distant with Colin and that she could see how unhappy he was. He deserves better, she'd written. Someone who actually pays attention to him instead of working all the time. I felt sick reading it. Another message from 2 months ago said Colin had been confiding in her about our marriage problems and that she thought she could make him happier than I ever could. She'd actually written those words to our father. She was telling you all this and you didn't warn me? I looked up at Dad and he looked guilty. I thought she was just being dramatic. You know how Aubrey gets. She always has to make everything about herself. I didn't think she'd actually try to steal your husband. I thought she was just jealous and venting. He took the phone back and scrolled to another message. Look at the date on this one. It was from 3 months ago, about a week before Aubrey's apartment flooded. She'd written to Dad saying that my marriage was falling apart and that she was worried about me, but also that maybe it was for the best, because Colin needed someone who understood him. 1 week before the flood. I sat back in my chair and felt something click in my brain. Dad, when exactly did Aubrey's apartment flood? Dad looked at me with his eyebrows raised. About 3 months ago, middle of the month. Why? I did the math in my head. Aubrey had been texting Dad about my marriage problems and about how Colin deserved better exactly 1 week before her apartment conveniently flooded and she needed to move in with us. 1 week before, she suddenly had an excuse to be in my house every day while I was at work. 1 week before she started making coffee for my husband and bonding with him over there. Feelings. Do you think she caused the flood on purpose? I asked, and even as I said it, I knew it sounded crazy. But Dad didn't laugh. He just looked at me with this serious expression. I think your sister saw an opportunity and she took it. Whether she caused the flood or just used it, the timing is too perfect to ignore. He stood up and started pacing the kitchen like he did when he was working through a problem. We need to call your mother. She's 2 states away, but she always knew how to handle Aubrey's schemes when you girls were growing up. Remember when Aubrey convinced everyone at school that you stole her science project? Your mother was the one who figured out Aubrey had done the whole thing herself. I did remember that. I was 15, and Aubrey was 12, and she'd copied my project, and then told the teacher I'd stolen her work. Mom had gone to the school with both projects, and pointed out that Aubrey's had my name whited out in one corner where she'd missed erasing it. Aubrey had cried and played the victim, and some people still believed her version, but at least the teacher knew the truth. It's late, I said, looking at the clock on Dad's wall. Mom's probably asleep. Your mother hasn't slept past 9 in 30 years, Dad said, already dialing. She'll want to know about this. The phone rang twice before Mom picked up. Dan? Is everything okay? It's almost 10. I could hear the worry in her voice even through the phone speaker. Dad put her on speaker and set the phone on the table between us. The girls are having some trouble. Our older one is here with me now. Mom was quiet for a second. I had a feeling something was wrong. Is it about Aubrey? Dad and I looked at each other. Why would you think that? I asked. Mom sighed, and I could picture her sitting in her living room with her reading glasses on and a book in her lap. Because Aubrey called me last week asking the strangest questions. She wanted to know about sisters in the Bible, specifically whether there were any stories about sisters dating or marrying the same man. My jaw dropped. Dad closed his eyes and shook his head slowly. She was asking about Jacob and Rachel and Leah. Mom continued. She said it was for a book club discussion, but Aubrey hasn't read a book since high school. I knew something was going on, but I didn't want to pry. Now I'm guessing I should have. Mom, I said, leaning toward the phone. Aubrey and Colin want to be in a relationship, together, while I'm still married to him. They made a PowerPoint presentation about it. The silence on the other end was longer this time. When Mom spoke again, her voice was hard in a way I rarely heard from her. They made a what? A PowerPoint, with schedules and charts and a contract. They want to date each other and they want me to be okay with it. Aubrey's been living with us for 3 months and apparently she's been working on Colin the whole time. Mom made a sound that was half laugh and half something else. That girl. That sneaky little girl. I should have known when she called about the Bible stories. She was looking for permission. She wanted me to say something that made it okay. Dad jumped in. She also asked me for $5,000 last month. Said it was for apartment repairs. Now we think she never planned to move back. She wanted to stay with them permanently. Of course she did, Mom said. Aubrey doesn't do anything without a plan. She's been like this since she was 6 years old and figured out she could get extra dessert by crying to each parent separately. She paused. What do you need me to do? Dad looked at me, and I looked back at him, and for the first time since Colin had opened that stupid laptop, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. I had my dad in the kitchen with me and my mom on the phone, and they were both ready to help me fight. I don't know yet, I admitted. I just found out about all this tonight. Colin and Aubrey are still at my house probably trying to figure out how to spin this. Dad gave me the name of a divorce lawyer. Good, Mom said firmly. Use it. First thing Monday morning. And don't go back to that house alone. Don't give them a chance to talk you into anything. Colin's got that way of making everything sound reasonable, and Aubrey knows exactly which buttons to push. She was right about that. Even now, part of my brain was trying to find excuses for them. Maybe they really did have feelings. Maybe I had been too focused on work. Maybe there was something wrong with me that made Colin look elsewhere. But then I remembered the schedule. Blue for me, pink for Aubrey. Like we were items on a to-do list instead of people. I'm not going back, I said, and I meant it. Good girl, Dad said quietly. Mom's voice came through the phone again. I'm looking at flights right now. I can be there Saturday morning. We'll figure this out together as a family. A real family. Not whatever twisted thing Aubrey is trying to create. So my sister had been laying groundwork with both parents trying to find someone who would support her little takeover. She'd tested Dad with the money request. She'd tested Mom with weird Bible questions. And when neither parent gave her the green light, she went ahead anyway, thinking she and Colin could present it as a done deal I'd have to accept. What Aubrey didn't count on was that our family talks to each other. By midnight, both parents knew everything, and we had a group text going. Mom was booking a flight for the weekend. Dad was researching our state's divorce laws. And me? I was finally seeing my sister clearly for the first time in 30 years. I barely slept that night in Dad's guest room. But when I did finally drift off, I slept harder than I had in months. When I woke up, the sun was already bright through the curtains, and I could smell coffee from downstairs. I checked my phone and saw over 20 messages from Colin and a bunch from Aubrey, but I didn't open any of them. I just put my phone on silent and went down to find Dad sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee and his laptop open to some legal website. Morning, sweetheart, he said without looking up. There's coffee in the pot and I already called that lawyer. He can see you Monday afternoon. I poured myself a cup and sat down across from him, feeling like maybe things were actually going to be okay. That's when we heard a car pull into the driveway. Dad looked up at me with his eyebrows raised and got up to look out the front window. His whole body went stiff. It's Colin, he said, and his voice went flat and cold in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. He's getting out of his car with a folder. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but Dad put his hand up before I could even get out of my chair. Stay here. Let me handle this. He walked to the front door and I heard him open it before Colin could even knock. I moved closer to the doorway so I could see what was happening on the porch. Colin was standing there in his nice work shirt looking like he'd practiced this whole thing in the mirror before driving over. He had a thick folder in his hands and he was already opening his mouth to start talking. We need to talk like adults, Colin said in that calm voice he always used when he was trying to sound reasonable. Your daughter is overreacting by involving family in what should be a private matter between married people. If we could just sit down and discuss this rationally, I'm sure we can find a solution that works for everyone. Dad stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and didn't move an inch to let Colin inside. You have exactly 2 minutes to explain yourself before I call the police for trespassing on my property. Colin didn't even blink at that. He just nodded like this was exactly what he expected and started pulling papers out of his folder. I understand this seems unconventional, he said in that explaining voice like he was talking to a slow child. But if you look at these articles from relationship experts and psychologists, you'll see that polyamory is actually a healthy and normal lifestyle choice for many couples. He held up the papers so Dad could see the headers and the highlighted sections. There's peer-reviewed research showing that people in consensual non-monogamous relationships report high levels of satisfaction and communication. It's not something to be afraid of. It's actually progressive and modern, and many families are thriving with these arrangements. He held the papers out toward Dad like he expected my father to take them and read every word carefully. This one is from a university study that shows children raised in polyamorous households have the same developmental outcomes as children in traditional families. And this one talks about how jealousy is actually a social construct that can be unlearned with proper communication techniques. Dad looked at the papers in Colin's outstretched hand for about 1 second. Then he reached out and took them. I watched from the doorway as my father held those articles that Colin had probably spent hours printing and highlighting, and then Dad tore them in half, right down the middle. He didn't read a single word. He didn't even glance at what was printed on them. He just ripped them apart and let the pieces fall onto the porch floor at Colin's feet. Colin's mouth fell open, and for a second he just stared at the torn paper on the ground like he couldn't understand what had just happened. Sir, those were peer-reviewed studies from respected journals, he said, and I could hear his voice getting a little higher. If you would just take the time to educate yourself about modern relationship structures, you would understand that what Aubrey and I are proposing is based on solid psychological principles. This isn't something we came up with on our own. There's a whole community of people who live this way happily. Dad didn't move. You have about 90 seconds left. I watched Colin's face change as he tried to figure out what to do next. His calm mask started to crack just a little around the edges. I could practically see him thinking fast, running through his mental list of arguments, trying to find a new angle that would work on my father. Then something shifted in his expression, and I knew whatever came out of his mouth next was going to make me angry. Look, I didn't want to say this, Colin said, and his voice got lower like he was sharing something private. But the truth is, your daughter has been emotionally distant for years. She works all the time. She's never home. When she is home, she's tired and stressed, and she doesn't have any energy left for me or our relationship. He spread his hands like he was being so honest and vulnerable. I was lonely. I tried to talk to her about it, but she would just shut down. She doesn't communicate. She doesn't share her feelings. She comes home from work and stares at her phone and falls asleep on the couch. I felt my hands curl into fists at my sides. He was blaming me. He was actually standing on my father's porch trying to make this my fault. After 7 years of trying, I finally found someone who actually listens to me and makes me feel valued. Colin continued. Is it my fault that person happens to be her sister? I didn't plan for this to happen. Aubrey was just there. She understood me. She paid attention when your daughter wouldn't. She made me feel like I mattered. Can you really blame me for responding to that kind of connection? Dad let him finish every word. He stood there with his arms crossed and his face like stone and let Colin say all of it. And when Colin was done and looking at Dad with that hopeful expression, like maybe he'd finally found the right argument, my father spoke. My daughter will be in contact through her lawyer. Now get off my property. Colin actually took a step back like the words had pushed him. Wait, can't we at least talk about this? I'm trying to be reasonable here. I'm trying to find a solution that works for everyone. Your daughter is throwing away a 7-year marriage over a misunderstanding. Don't you think she owes it to herself to at least hear me out? We have a house together. We have a life together. We have shared accounts and plans and history. You can't just throw all that away because you're upset. Dad's voice got even colder than I'd ever heard it. The only person who threw away this marriage is you. And if you're not off my property in the next 10 seconds, I'm calling the police. Then he shut the door. Not slammed it. Just closed it firmly like Colin wasn't even worth the effort of a slam. I ran to the front window and watched Colin standing on the porch looking completely lost. He stared at the closed door for a long moment like he couldn't process what had just happened. His mouth was moving a little like he was still trying to think of the right words that would make the door open again. He looked down at the torn pieces of paper scattered on the porch floor. Slowly, he bent down and started picking them up, gathering the ripped articles in his hands like they still meant something. He stood there holding those torn papers and looking at the door, and I could see on his face that he genuinely could not understand why his logic hadn't worked. In his mind, he'd come prepared. He'd done research. He'd printed evidence. He had arguments ready for every objection. How could anyone reject solid reasoning and peer-reviewed studies? He walked back to his car, still clutching those ripped-up articles like he didn't know what to do with them. He sat in the driver's seat for at least 2 full minutes just staring through the windshield at Dad's house. Then finally, he started the car and pulled away. Dad came back into the kitchen and sat down across from me. You okay? He asked. I wasn't sure how to answer that. He blamed me, I said. and my voice came out smaller than I wanted. He said I was emotionally distant. He said that's why he went after Aubrey. Like I made him do it. Dad shook his head slowly. That's what people like Colin do. They can't admit they did something wrong, so they find a way to make it someone else's fault. You could have been the perfect wife who did everything right, and he still would have found an excuse. That's how these people work. They twist everything around until somehow you're the bad guy for being upset that they hurt you. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. This is not your fault. Not any of it. Colin made a choice and Aubrey made a choice, and now they get to live with those choices. But you don't have to live with them. You get to walk away and build something better. I felt tears building in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. What if he's right, though? What if I was a bad wife? Dad squeezed my hand. Even if you work too much or were tired sometimes, which is just called being a normal person with a job, by the way, there's a word for what you do when you're unhappy in a marriage. It's called divorce, or counseling, or having an honest conversation. You don't go sneaking around with your wife's sister for weeks and then present it like a business proposal with slides and contracts. That's not what an unhappy husband does. That's what a selfish man does who wants everything his way. Colin sent 17 texts over the next 2 hours, and I watched each one come in without answering. First, he was being reasonable, saying we should talk this through like adults. Then he was apologetic, saying he never meant to hurt me, and maybe the presentation was too much too fast. Then he got angry, saying I was destroying our family over a misunderstanding, and that I was being dramatic. The last text said Aubrey was packing her things and leaving because I'd made her feel unwelcome in her own sister's home. Her own sister's home. My house that I paid half the mortgage on. My kitchen where she made coffee and my mug for my husband. Dad saw my face while I read the texts and just shook his head. We both knew this wasn't over. Aubrey never went down without making sure everyone else went down too. When Mom landed Saturday morning, we would finally put an end to this. But first, Aubrey had one more trick up her sleeve. Friday night, I was sitting in Dad's living room trying to watch some cooking show and not think about my life falling apart when my phone rang. It wasn't Colin or Aubrey this time, but a friend from my book club, someone I'd known for years and trusted. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked before I could even say hello. "I just saw Aubrey's post and I wanted to check on you." I felt my stomach go tight. What post? There was a pause on the other end, like she couldn't believe I didn't know. She posted this really long thing on social media about 20 minutes ago. It's everywhere. People are sharing it and commenting, and I just thought you should know before you see it from someone else. I thanked her and hung up and immediately opened my phone to Aubrey's page. Dad looked up from his crossword puzzle when he heard my breathing change. "What is it?" he asked, but I couldn't answer because I was too busy reading what my sister had written about me to the whole world. The post was long, at least 5 paragraphs, and it had a photo at the top of Aubrey looking sad with mascara running down her face like she'd been crying. The caption said, "Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the worst." And then the rest of it was worse. She wrote about how she'd been living with me for 3 months after her apartment flooded, and how I'd been cold and controlling the whole time. She said I made her feel unwelcome in her own family, and that I'd always been jealous of her since we were kids. She talked about falling in love with someone unexpected, and how love doesn't follow the rules we think it should. She never said Colin's name, but anyone who knew us would figure it out. The worst part was how she framed it. According to Aubrey's post, she hadn't done anything wrong. She'd just had feelings and been honest about them. And in response, her controlling older sister had kicked her out of the house and tried to turn their parents against her. She wrote that she was homeless now because of me, and that she'd lost her family over something she couldn't help. "I never meant to hurt anyone," she'd written at the end. "I just fell in love." Is that really so unforgivable? I thought family was supposed to support you no matter what. I guess I was wrong about what family means. I scrolled down to the comments and felt sick. There were already over 100 of them, and most of them were on Aubrey's side. "Your sister sounds so toxic," one person wrote. "Real family would be happy that you found love." Another comment said, "Love is love. It doesn't matter who it's with. Your sister needs to grow up and stop being so controlling." Someone else wrote, "This happens more than people realize. Your sister is just mad because she's insecure about her own marriage. You deserve to be happy." I kept scrolling and it just got worse. People were calling me jealous and bitter and controlling. They said I was using this as an excuse to cut Aubrey out of the family because I'd always been threatened by her. One comment said, "Your sister sounds like one of those women who can't stand when someone else gets attention. She's probably been waiting for a chance to get rid of you for years." Nobody was asking what Colin's role in all this was. Nobody was pointing out that Aubrey had moved into my house and then started going after my husband. In Aubrey's version of the story, she was just a girl who fell in love and got punished for it by her mean older sister. My hands were shaking as I started typing a response. I was going to tell everyone the truth. I was going to explain about the PowerPoint and the schedule and the contract they'd already filled out. I was going to post the screenshots of Aubrey's text to Dad where she called me names and said she could make Colin happier. I was going to destroy her little victim story with facts. But before I could finish typing, Dad was beside me, gently taking the phone out of my hands. "Don't do that," he said, and his voice was calm but serious. "Whatever you're about to write, don't." I looked up at him with tears burning in my eyes. She's lying about me to everyone. People think I'm the bad guy. They think I kicked her out for no reason. I have to defend myself. Dad shook his head slowly. Let me tell you something my father told me a long time ago. Never fight a pig in mud. You both get dirty and the pig likes it. He sat down next to me on the couch and put his hand on my shoulder. If you respond to that post, you're playing her game. She wants you to fight with her in public where everyone can see. She wants you to look angry and mean and defensive. Even if you tell the truth, people will just see two sisters fighting and they'll believe whoever cries prettier. And we both know that's Aubrey. I knew he was right, but it still hurts so bad to see all those comments about me from people who didn't know anything about what really happened. So I'm just supposed to let her say all this about me? Let all her friends think I'm this horrible person? Dad took his own phone out of his pocket. No, you're going to let me handle this. There's a difference between fighting in public and fighting in private. Aubrey wants a public war because she knows how to play that game. But she doesn't want our family seeing those texts she sent me. She doesn't want anyone knowing what she really said about you behind your back. He scrolled through his phone until he found Aubrey's number. You're going to call her? I asked. I'm going to give her a choice, Dad said. She can take down that post by morning, or I start sharing some screenshots of my own. Let's see how sympathetic people are when they read what she really thinks of her sister. He hit the call button and put the phone on speaker so I could hear. It rang 3 times before Aubrey answered, and her voice was stuffy like she'd been crying. Daddy? She said, and I could hear her trying to sound small and sad. Daddy, I'm so glad you called. I need to talk to you about what's happening. Nobody is listening to my side, and I just need someone to understand. Dad's voice was cold in a way I'd rarely heard from him. Aubrey, I saw your post. There was a pause on the other end. I just needed people to know the truth. Everyone's against me and I didn't do anything wrong. I just fell in love. Is that really so bad? You've always taught us to follow our hearts and that's all I was doing. Dad cut her off. You have until morning to take down that post. Aubrey's voice changed, getting harder and more defensive. Why? Because it makes my sister look bad? She's the one who called you and made this into a big family drama. She's the one who kicked me out. I'm just telling my side of the story. I have a right to defend myself. Dad didn't raise his voice at all, but somehow that made it scarier. Let me explain something to you. I have every text you've ever sent me saved on this phone, including the ones where you called your sister a boring doormat, including the ones where you said Colin deserved better and you could make him happier, including the one where you asked me for $5,000 that we both know you never planned to use for apartment repairs. The line went silent. I could hear Aubrey breathing, but she didn't say anything. If that post is still up by tomorrow morning, Dad continued, I start sharing those texts with everyone. Your mother, your cousins, your aunts and uncles, everyone in the family who's reading your little victim story right now. They can all see what you really said about your sister before you stole her husband. Aubrey's voice came back smaller now. You wouldn't do that. I'm your daughter too. You stopped being my daughter when you decided to destroy your sister's marriage, Dad said, and his voice was still that scary calm. You have until morning. That's 12 hours to decide if you want the whole family knowing who you really are. He hung up before she could respond and set the phone down on the coffee table between us. I stared at him and didn't know what to say. Will you really send those texts to everyone? I asked. Dad nodded slowly. If she doesn't take it down, then yes. Everyone needs to know what kind of person Aubrey really is. She's counting on us being too polite to fight back. She's counting on family loyalty keeping her secrets safe. But she broke that loyalty when she went after you. She doesn't get to hide behind family anymore. We sat there in the quiet for a few minutes and I kept refreshing Aubrey's page to see if the post was still up. The comments were still coming in and people were still calling me names, but somehow it didn't hurt as much now. Because I knew Dad had those texts. I knew he was willing to use them. And I knew that by tomorrow morning either that post would be gone or Aubrey's whole victim story would fall apart in front of everyone who believed her. By Saturday morning, the post was gone, but the damage was done. Half our extended family had seen it. Cousins were texting me asking what was happening and if I was okay, and whether the stuff Aubrey wrote was true. An aunt called Dad demanding to know why he was taking sides and saying that Aubrey was just a girl in love, and I was being too harsh. Aubrey had turned my private humiliation into public entertainment, and even though she deleted everything, the screenshots were already spreading through family group chats. But here's the thing about Aubrey. She always overplays her hand. She gets so focused on winning the moment that she doesn't see what's coming next. Because now she'd made this a family matter. She'd involved everyone with that post. And when Mom walked through Dad's front door that afternoon with her carry-on bag and her reading glasses pushed up on her head, I knew exactly whose side she was on. She gave me a long hug first without saying anything, and then set her bag down in the hallway. She walked straight to the kitchen table and sat down with that look on her face that meant business. Dad and I sat down across from her and she folded her hands on the table and looked at both of us. It's time for a family meeting. I felt my stomach get tight when Mom said those words, but I figured she meant just the 3 of us sitting down to figure out next steps. Then she looked at Dad and said something that made my heart drop. We need to invite Aubrey and Colin here too. Everyone deserves a chance to speak their piece. I opened my mouth to argue, but she held up her hand. I know what you're going to say, but if we don't let them talk, Then they'll always say we didn't give them a fair chance. They'll tell everyone we ganged up on them without hearing their side. We give them one chance to explain themselves in front of the whole family, and then we're done. Dad nodded slowly like he understood, even though I could see he didn't love the idea either. She has a point. If we shut them out completely, Aubrey will use that against us. She'll say we were too scared to hear the truth. I wanted to scream that we already knew the truth, and that giving them a platform was exactly what they wanted, but Mom was already pulling out her phone. I'll text Aubrey. Dad, you text Colin. Tell them to be here at 3 o'clock and that this is their one chance to make their case. I sat there feeling sick while my parents sent those texts. This was a mistake. I could feel it in my bones. Aubrey was good at talking her way out of things, and Colin had that calm, logical way of explaining stuff that made people nod along even when he was saying crazy things. What if they actually convinced my parents? What if Mom and Dad heard their arguments and started to think maybe I was overreacting? The next few hours felt like waiting for a dentist appointment, except worse. I tried to eat lunch, but everything tasted like cardboard. I tried to watch TV, but I couldn't focus on anything. I just kept looking at the clock and watching the minutes tick by until 3 o'clock. At 2:45, a car pulled into the driveway and my heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Dad went to the window and his jaw got tight. It's Aubrey. I watched through the curtain as my sister got out of her car and I barely recognized her. She was dressed nice in a professional-looking outfit like she was going to a job interview. Her hair was done up pretty, and her makeup was perfect, and she was carrying a thick folder under her arm. She looked confident. She looked prepared. She looked like someone who had been practicing for this moment. Mom let her in, and Aubrey walked into the living room with her head held high like she owned the place. She didn't even look at me. She just sat down in the big armchair across from the couch and crossed her legs and set her folder on her lap. "Thank you for giving me a chance to explain," she said to Mom and Dad, completely ignoring me. "I know this has been hard for everyone, but I think once you understand the research behind what Colin and I are proposing, you'll see that we're not doing anything wrong." She patted the folder on her lap. "I brought some materials from relationship experts and psychologists who specialize in alternative family structures. There's actually a lot of science supporting what we're trying to do." I wanted to throw something at her, but I just sat there with my hands in my lap trying to keep my face calm. A few minutes later, another car pulled up, and Colin walked in carrying his laptop bag like he was showing up for a business meeting. He nodded at Dad and Mom and then sat down next to Aubrey on the love seat. They didn't hold hands this time, but they sat close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. "I appreciate you all being willing to have this conversation," Colin said in that smooth voice I used to love. "I know my presentation the other day was a lot to take in, but I've put together some new materials that I think will help everyone understand that this isn't a betrayal. It's actually a legitimate lifestyle choice that millions of people around the world practice successfully." He pulled his laptop out of his bag and started setting it up on the coffee table. "If you'll just give me a few minutes to show you some of the research, I think you'll see that what Aubrey and I are proposing is based on solid psychological principles." Mom held up her hand. "Before you start with any presentations, I think Aubrey should speak first. She's the one who posted all that stuff online. She's the one who started this whole public mess. Let her say her piece." Aubrey nodded like she'd been waiting for exactly this moment. She stood up from her chair and faced my parents like she was giving a speech at school. I could tell she'd practiced this. Every word was smooth and perfect, and she never stumbled or paused. "I want to start by saying that I never meant to hurt anyone," Aubrey began. "I know how this looks from the outside, but you have to understand that falling in love isn't something you can control. It just happens. And what happened between me and Colin was real and pure and beautiful." She put her hand on her chest like she was feeling all these deep emotions. "The truth is that my sister never appreciated what she had. For years, I watched Colin try so hard to make her happy, and for years, I watched her ignore him. She was always too busy with work. She was always too tired to spend time with him. She would come home and barely say 2 words to him before falling asleep on the couch. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but Mom gave me a look that said, 'Wait.' So I sat there and listened while my sister kept talking about how I was a bad wife who didn't deserve my husband. Colin is such a special person," Aubrey continued. "He's smart and caring, and he gives so much to the people he loves. But my sister couldn't see that. She took him for granted every single day. And when I moved in and started getting to know him, I saw what she was missing. I saw this amazing man who just wanted someone to appreciate him." She looked right at Mom now, and her eyes were getting shiny like she might cry. "Our connection is real. I know you might not understand it, but what Colin and I have is something special. We didn't plan for this to happen. We didn't go looking for it. It just grew naturally from spending time together and really seeing each other." She held up her folder. "And before you say that what we're doing is wrong, I want you to know that there's real science behind this. Polyamory is practiced by millions of people all over the world. There are therapists and relationship experts who specifically help families like ours navigate these kinds of arrangements. This isn't some crazy thing we made up. It's a legitimate lifestyle that many happy, healthy families choose." She opened her folder and pulled out some printed pages. "I have articles here from psychology journals. I have testimonials from people who live this way and love it. I have research showing that children raised in polyamorous households do just as well as children in traditional families. This isn't about cheating or betrayal. This is about expanding our understanding of love and family. She set the papers on the coffee table next to Colin's laptop. All I'm asking is that this family evolves its thinking. That instead of judging us, you try to understand us. That instead of shutting us out, you accept that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. She sat back down and looked at me for the first time since she'd started talking. I love you, sis. I never wanted to hurt you. But I also love Colin, and I'm not going to apologize for that. The heart wants what the heart wants. The room went quiet when she finished. Nobody said anything for what felt like forever. I looked at Mom and her face was unreadable. I looked at Dad and he was staring at the floor. Colin was nodding along like everything Aubrey said made perfect sense. And suddenly I felt this cold fear creeping up my spine because Aubrey had been really good. She'd been calm and reasonable and she'd hit all the right emotional notes. She made herself sound like the victim of her own feelings instead of a schemer who plotted to steal her sister's husband. For just a moment I wondered if maybe she was actually getting through to them. Maybe Mom was thinking about all those articles about polyamory. Maybe Dad was remembering how stressed I'd been at work lately. Maybe they were starting to think that I was the unreasonable one for not being more open-minded about this. Colin leaned forward with his laptop ready to start his presentation, and I could see he thought he was winning. He had that little smile on his face that he always got when a meeting was going his way. And I sat there on my parents' couch feeling smaller and more scared than I had since this whole nightmare started, because my sister had just given the performance of her life, and I wasn't sure anyone could see through it. Mom let Aubrey finish her whole speech and she let Colin set up his laptop, and for a few horrible seconds, I really thought they might have won because the room was so quiet and nobody was jumping in to defend me. But then Mom reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of papers, and I saw Aubrey's eyes go to that stack and something in her face changed just a little. Before we look at any more articles about polyamory, Mom said in that calm voice she used when she was about to drop a bomb, I think we need to talk about something else first. Something about your apartment flood, Aubrey. Aubrey's confident posture got a little stiffer. What about it? My apartment flooded and I lost everything. That's why I had to move in with my sister. Everyone knows that. Mom nodded slowly. Yes, the flood was real. I called your landlord last week to ask about it. He confirmed the whole building had water damage from a broken pipe upstairs. She flipped through her papers until she found what she was looking for. But here's the interesting part. Your renter's insurance paid out $8,000 for your losses. I have the claim receipt right here. She held up a printed document and I could see numbers on it even from across the room. $8,000, Aubrey. That's a lot of money for someone who supposedly needed $5,000 from her father for repairs. Aubrey's face was getting pale, but she kept her voice steady. I used that money to replace my furniture and clothes. Everything got ruined in the flood. Mom shook her head. No, you didn't. Because I also talked to your friend from college, the one you've been texting about all of this for months. She pulled out more papers, and these ones looked like printed text messages with phone numbers at the top. She was very helpful once I explained what was happening. She sent me everything. Aubrey stood up fast and her folder fell off her lap, scattering articles all over the floor. You had no right to go through my private messages. That's an invasion of my privacy. Whatever she showed you is taken out of context. But Mom was already reading from the first page. This is from 3 months ago, 2 weeks before your apartment flooded. You wrote to your friend, and I quote, I'm going to move in with my sister for a while. Colin's already paying attention to me when she's not around. It won't take long to get him hooked. The room went dead silent. Colin's little smile disappeared, and he looked at Aubrey with confusion on his face. What is she talking about? He asked. You told me the flood forced you to move in. You said it was an emergency. Aubrey held up her hands. She's twisting my words. I was just joking around with my friend. We say stupid stuff to each other all the time. It doesn't mean anything. Mom kept reading. Here's another one from 2 months ago. You wrote, Colin is so easy to manipulate. He thinks I actually care about his feelings, but really I just tell him what he wants to hear. Once I get him hooked, I'll convince him to divorce his wife and keep the house. It's a nice house, and I deserve it more than she does. Colin stood up from the love seat and took a step away from Aubrey. You said that about me? You said I was easy to manipulate? His voice sounded different now, smaller and confused, like a kid who just found out Santa wasn't real. Aubrey reached for his arm. Baby, that's not what I meant. I was just venting to my friend. You know how girls talk. We exaggerate everything. I didn't mean any of it. But Mom wasn't done. She flipped to another page and her voice got harder. This one is my personal favorite. From 6 weeks ago, right after my daughter went to that work conference. You wrote, my sister is such a boring doormat. She doesn't deserve a husband like Colin. He needs someone exciting and fun. Someone like me. She just works all the time and ignores him. I'm going to give him everything she won't, and then I'm going to take everything she has. She looked up from the paper and stared right at Aubrey. A boring doormat. That's what you called your own sister while you were living in her house and eating her food and planning to steal her husband. I sat there frozen on the couch listening to my mother read my sister's real thoughts out loud. All those texts Aubrey had sent to Dad calling me controlling and cold, All those complaints about how I didn't appreciate Colin, none of it was because she cared about him. She didn't love Colin at all. She just wanted what I had. The house, the husband, the life I'd spent years building. Colin was staring at Aubrey like he'd never seen her before. "You used me," he said, and his voice cracked a little. "This whole time I thought we had something real. I thought you understood me. But you were just playing a game." Aubrey tried to laugh it off, but it came out wrong. Too high and too fake. "Colin, come on. Those texts don't mean anything. I was just being dramatic with my friend. You know how I feel about you. What we have is real. I love you." But even I could see that her mask was slipping. She didn't look confident anymore. She looked scared. Dad stood up from his chair and walked over until he was standing right in front of Aubrey. He didn't yell. He didn't raise his voice at all. He just looked at her with this expression on his face that I'd never seen before, like he was looking at a stranger instead of his own daughter. "I'm going to ask you one question," Dad said slowly, "and I want you to tell me the truth. For once in your life, tell me the truth." Aubrey swallowed hard and didn't say anything. "Did you ever love Colin?" Dad asked. "Or was this always about getting what your sister had?" The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Aubrey opened her mouth to answer and then closed it again. She looked at Colin and then at Mom and then at me, and I watched something break behind her eyes. She couldn't lie anymore. The texts were right there in black and white. Everyone had heard what she really thought. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, Aubrey had nothing to say. Her silence stretched on for 5 seconds, then 10. Colin made a sound that was almost a laugh, but not really. "Oh my God," he said quietly. "Oh my God, I'm such an idiot." He sat back down on the love seat and put his head in his hands. "I believed everything you said. I thought we had this deep connection. I was ready to blow up my whole marriage for you." He looked up at Aubrey with something like disgust on his face. "You made me think my wife was the problem. You made me think she didn't appreciate me. But it was all just a game to you. I was just a way to get her house." Aubrey finally found her voice. "That's not fair. I do have feelings for you. Maybe the way I talked to my friend was wrong, but that doesn't mean what we have isn't real. You felt it too, Colin. You can't fake that kind of connection." But Colin was shaking his head. "I don't even know what was real anymore. Everything you told me about my marriage, about my wife being distant and cold, was that just stuff you made up to turn me against her? Did you even mean any of it, or were you just telling me what I wanted to hear like you said in those texts?" Aubrey didn't have an answer for that either. I watched my sister standing in the middle of my parents' living room with her pretty outfit and her carefully done makeup and her folder of articles scattered all over the floor. She'd spent months planning this. She'd tested both our parents to see if they'd support her. She'd manipulated my husband with fake vulnerability and practiced speeches about connection. And now it was all falling apart because Mom did what Aubrey never expected. Mom did her own research. I stood up from the couch and my legs felt strong for the first time in days. I looked at Colin, who was still sitting there with his head in his hands, looking like his whole world had just collapsed. "The divorce papers will be ready Monday," I said, and my voice came out steady and calm. "You can expect to hear from my lawyer by the end of the week." Colin looked up at me, and for a second I thought he might try to apologize or explain or ask for another chance. But he just nodded slowly like he knew he'd lost the right to ask for anything. Then I turned to Aubrey, who was still standing there with her mouth open like she couldn't believe this was really happening. "You have 48 hours to get your things out of my house," I said. "After that, whatever's left goes on the lawn." Aubrey's face twisted into something ugly. "You can't do that. That's my stuff. I have rights." Dad stepped forward. "Actually, she can. It's her house and you've been staying there as a guest. A guest who's no longer welcome. I suggest you start packing." Aubrey looked around the room like she was searching for someone to take her side. She looked at Mom, but Mom was staring at her with cold disappointment. She looked at Dad, but he had that same stranger look on his face. She looked at Colin, but he wouldn't even meet her eyes. And finally she looked at me, her older sister, who she'd called a boring doormat, whose husband she'd tried to steal, whose life she'd tried to take over. "This isn't fair," Aubrey said, and her voice was shaking now. "I made one mistake. I fell for the wrong person. That doesn't mean you get to throw me away like I'm nothing. I'm still your sister." I thought about all those texts Mom had read out loud, all the planning and scheming and lying, all the times Aubrey sat across from me at my own kitchen table drinking coffee from my mug while secretly plotting to take everything I had. "You're right," I said. "You are my sister. And that makes what you did even worse, because I trusted you. I let you into my home when you needed help. And you used that to try to destroy my marriage and steal my husband and take my house." I grabbed my purse from the couch and walked toward the door. 48 hours, Aubrey. Then your stuff is on the lawn and I never want to see you again." I walked out of my parents' house and got in my car and sat there for a minute just breathing. Through the window, I could see Aubrey inside, still trying to argue with Mom and Dad, while Colin sat on the love seat looking like someone had punched him in the stomach. But I didn't care about any of them anymore. I pulled out of Dad's driveway and headed home to the house that was still mine. The house I'd helped pay for. The house where I'd be sleeping alone tonight for the first time in 7 years. And you know what? That sounded pretty good right now.